What kind of feeling bubbles up within you when you hear the word reverence? Reverence. Do you have flashbacks of people saying it to you? People, places, things, assemblies, all sorts of feelings and memories well up within us when we hear the word reverence. Well, reverence is a scriptural term that we're going to go into today because there's nothing wrong with the word itself. It's the experiences we've had with it and what religion has done to it. That is why a lot of the world feels the way they do about scripture. So that's why in these behaviour revolution scriptures we're seeking to improve the reputation of scripture by speaking normal to start with, 21st century, every day, just how we all talk, colloquial, slang. That's what we're doing here. So today we want to talk about reverence, and Moses is continuing. Let's go here. Reverence. It's more than a ballet move, you know. Reverence. So Moses is continuing in Deuteronomy 14. We're going to do 14 and 15 today. And he says, people of Israel, remember that you are Yahuwah's children. Remember that you are Yahuwah's children. So when you're saddened by the death of a loved one, don't ever cut yourselves or shave the front of your heads like the nations do when they're mourning. For out of all the nations on this earth, Yahuwah your Elohim chose you to be his own set-apart people, a treasured possession. You belong to him, so don't behave like those who worship other false deities. That's the key here. Everything comes back to behaving like all the fake-ass deities out there. And what the people are required to do in worship to these deities. Yahusha hates it. So it's not about taking a razor to your head or your face or anything like that. It's about what you're doing it for. And the same could be said today of many, many, many different cultures, festivals, celebrations we go along to, you know. If you're cutting your hair for a certain reason, for a pagan celebration, well, it's not the hair that's the issue, it's the pagan celebration. Like here, it's nothing to do with the cutting yourselves or the shaving your head. It's the fact that he doesn't want his people doing what the pagans do, all right, for the same reason. So let's go on, because it's not just that by itself. Should we go out and get tattoos and piercings all over us? Let's have a look. Recall, think back to Leviticus. Recall that animals sacrificed to Yahusha on the brazen altar weren't allowed to have any blemishes. Animals being sacrificed weren't allowed to have any blemishes. No scars, weren't allowed to be sickly or weak in any way. They had to be in perfect condition with zero defects. Otherwise, Yahusha wasn't interested. This same principle also carried over to the priesthood. For any priest who had a physical deformity, such as a burn mark, a deep scar, or a missing limb from birth, could not serve as a priest. And likewise, this same principle also carried over to the common population of Israel. While a Hebrew with a birth defect was not necessarily penalized by Yahusha or considered cursed, one thing he was not to do was intentionally create a defect. Intentionally create a defect by scarring or disfiguring himself in any way, as the Canaanites did in their mourning practices. So yes, you could say no scarring or disfiguring yourself for idolatry. But if you're doing it without idolatry, it's okay. But just look at the pattern, because it's all about patterns, remember, in scripture, patterns. The animals had to be perfect. The priesthood had to be perfect. No blemishes, scars, you know, not sickly or weak. They had to be in prime condition, just like the priesthood. And Israel couldn't approach the tabernacle if they were unclean either. So what does this say? I mean, I think I'll go into it. Let's keep going. We'll draw our conclusions a little later. We've got some nutty pictures there. They look like a happy bunch, don't they? Where do you draw the line? As we've previously discussed in Leviticus, it's not a huge mortal evil to tattoo and pierce ourselves, unless it's to worship the dead or practice idolatry. That's the conclusion we came to in Leviticus, you know. Drinking, smoking, piercing, tattooing, all those things we came to, we're not mortal evils. They're just habits, you know, do them, don't do them. They're not to do with our deliverance. They're not deliverance issues, you know. They're not behavioural issues. So as we've previously discussed in Leviticus, it's not a huge mortal evil to tattoo and pierce ourselves unless it's to worship the dead or practice idolatry. However, it appears here that Yahusha views them as deformities. Deformities to a perfectly designed vessel made in his image. Because that's what we all are, created in his image. I know the genome isn't what it used to be back when he created Adam and Ḥawā, but we're still created, mankind is created in the image of Yahusha. So Yahusha views these things as deformities, cutting yourself and inking yourself all that, to a perfectly designed vessel made in his image. We know that the dragon, we know that the dragon hates anything that resembles Yahusha. So if he can get mankind to deform themselves in any way possible, whether it be genetically or just fashionably or aesthetically on your skin, whatever, will he do that? If the dragon can pollute anything that's created in Yahusha's image, he will. It's like vandalizing with graffiti Yahusha's divine real estate that houses the eternal portal. And you saw how specific he was with the requirements for his earthly tabernacle, the different layers of skin and how many posts and columns and pillars and nuts and bolts and screws and, you know, all those things, pieces of furniture. So it's like, so how much detail does he have regarding our behaviour in these vessels? Yahusha certainly doesn't judge. Don't worry if you come to Yahusha and you've got all these things on your body from your past. It doesn't matter. Yahusha doesn't judge us on our outward appearances when we come to him, but on the conditions of our hearts. So he doesn't judge us on outward appearances when we come to him, but on the condition of our hearts. So do you think, here's the question, do you think his immersed bride, do you think his immersed bride should behave in this way? Drawing attention to herself by deforming her body like this? Now, you know, putting a little earring here or an earring there, you know, like an earring to go out to dinner or something is very different to these pictures here, isn't it? This is literal deformity, isn't it? Look, this one's got implants in a skull. Wants to look like a dragon or something. And look at this. Imagine having a conversation. Imagine the dialogue that would come out of their mouths if they could open their mouths. I mean, look at this guy's got spikes everywhere. So, but the thing I wanted to say is that this is a personal journey. This is not religion. Behaviour evolution, Yahusha's bride, this isn't a religion where we tell you what to do. You're not allowed to pierce your ears. You're not allowed to drink. You're not allowed to smoke. You're not allowed to use coloured fonts on your art. All this rubbish, you know. You've got a relationship with your maker, creator, deliverer, Yahusha, on the portal of your heart. So it's up to you and him to communicate, and he will lead you through all this stuff, you know. So, because I'm sure, given that the word of Yahusha is coming to the younger generations, these issues are going to come up. Should I take out, I mean, imagine if you had hoops like that in your ears. You'd probably want to keep them there, wouldn't you, even if you did come to Yahusha? Because otherwise you'd have these flapping bits of skin hanging around on you. You know, big holes flapping around. So, you know, that's a talking point. Whatever. That's between you and Yahusha. My question is just, once you come to Yahusha and you've been immersed, do you think his immersed bride should behave in this way? Drawing attention to herself by deforming her body like this. And because it costs a lot of money too. What could you be doing with that money in your life, with your family, goals, hopes, dreams, all that sort of thing, instead of on yourself? Because you're created perfect already, you know. As far as our shells are concerned, we're created in his image. So our behaviour is not perfect, but that's all I really wanted to say about this part. Moses just has a quick paragraph about don't cut yourself and don't mourn. Don't cut yourself while you're mourning. Don't shave your heads. And I put a video at the end of it about all that thing. We went, where is it? Right down here. See? Hair, beards, tats and whores, mate. We dealt with all that back in Leviticus. Hair, beards, tats and whores. So you can watch that video if you want to go into that in more detail, and also the what is food, because we're about to go into kosher and all that for the next couple of paragraphs. But I'm going to skim through because we dealt with it all in Leviticus. We all know what Yahusha's requirements are. Moses is just reminding them and telling them basically things aren't changing just because you're going into the land. So your decision, what you want to do with your body unto Yahusha. Yeah? We're not here to judge you. So we're coming into clean and unclean creatures now. After talking about the mourning processes and cutting yourself and shaving your head, Moses says, don't eat any disgusting, abominable animals. You can eat the meat of cattle, sheep and goats, wild sheep and goats, gazelles, antelopes and all kinds of deer. Remember, if the animal has divided hoofs and also chews the cud, they're fine to eat. But don't eat camels, rabbits and rock badgers. These animals chew the cud but do not have divided hoofs, and you must treat them as unclean. And definitely don't eat pork products, since pigs have divided hoofs, but they do not chew their cud. In fact, don't even touch a dead pig. You can eat any fish that has fins and scales too, but there are other creatures that live in the water that don't have fins and scales, and you must not eat them. But treat them as unclean, meaning don't touch them. Don't touch them, you're unclean. Likewise, you can eat any clean bird, but don't eat the meat of any of the following birds: eagles, vultures, falcons, kites, ravens, ostriches, owls, seagulls, hawks, pelicans, all sorts of owls, storks, herons, hoopoes. Definitely don't eat bats either. Swarming insects are unclean, so don't eat them either. However, there are certain kinds of winged insects that you may eat. Remember that you belong to Yahuwah your Elohim. So if you happen to find a dead animal, don't eat its meat. You may give it to foreigners. Who live in they're not clean anyway, so they don't care. Why should we care? They don't want to be clean, so here, have some unclean food. Don't eat its meat. You may give it to foreigners who live in your town, or sell it to foreigners who are visiting your town, but you are not to eat it, for you have been set apart unto me. Oh, and don't boil a young goat in its mother's milk either, like the nations do, because that's just cruel. Duh. Just because something can technically be eaten and digested by a human body does not necessarily make it legitimate food according to Yahusha. Remember that. And let's keep reading before I say that. Yahusha's instructions not to eat certain foods didn't actually begin at Mount Sinai with Moses, but in the Garden of Eden, when Yahusha told Adam and Ḥawwa that they could eat from any and all of the trees and vegetation without restriction, except the fruit from the tree of understanding good and evil. This instruction was the first rule he ever gave them, and it was all about food. Before that, think about this, ponder this. Before that, no moral laws or civil rules existed for Adam and Ḥawwa. In other words, until the very moment when Yahusha told them not to eat from that tree, it was impossible for Adam and Ḥawwa to disobey him. Imagine being in that position. Until the very moment when Yahusha told them not to eat from that tree, it was impossible for Adam and Ḥawwa to disobey him, because he hadn't given them any restrictions. Because the true definition of evil or sin is to break a divine law of Yahusha. Before that one law was established, Adam and Ḥawwa had absolutely zero knowledge of right and wrong, or good and evil. They didn't know. The concept of obedience to Yahusha and lawlessness meant nothing to them, because it is Yahusha's divine laws that gives us knowledge of what is evil behavior. Unless lines are drawn between what is acceptable and not acceptable to Yahusha, the concepts of evil, wrong and disobedience can't even exist. That's why we need his word, his divine laws in our life. In Romans 3, Paul says, the only knowledge of good and evil comes from Yahusha's divine laws. That's where we decide, not we decide, that's where we discover what good and evil is. That's where we are trained and our mind is washed, so we know what good and evil is, and not just our old conscience. So there's this familiar chart we dealt with, because we've dealt with shaving your head, cutting your skin, tattoos, and now we're dealing with food. It was all about set apartness. You could not go near the tabernacle. You'd be frackled up unless you were set apart. Wholeness and completeness, shalom. Remember this? The average Hebrew travelled up and down a spiritual ladder with set apartness at the top and uncleanliness at the bottom. So most people exist on the earth in this state now. Everybody's born in this state, common and clean. But due to our nature, fallen inclination, everybody on earth becomes common and unclean. That's why when we come to Yahusha, we need to be ritually washed. And the blood, to become set apart. We don't have to do this through animal blood anymore though. So, in the beginning, Adam and Ḥawwa were set apart as Yahusha is. And therefore they had an interdimensional, close marriage relationship with their Creator. But when they were disobedient, the connection was severed and they became common. The opposite to set apart is common. And neither can be mixed, because Yahusha won't ever allow his set apartness to be defiled. Thought about that? You've got to think about yourselves a little bit here, guys. Because Yahusha does. He never, until he became a man and actually compromised who he is to actually come into this dimension, nothing was going to get through that doorway to his dimension to pollute it. The minute Ⅎ𝗏, revolting, he got kicked out, because nothing will compromise Yahusha's set apartness. Holiness, they say. Set apartness, He won't be compromised, because he's not going to compromise who he is. He chose to put on flesh, come into this dimension, and was beaten, broken, and died and conquered death for us. But that was a different plan. As far as him, the eternal being, in the high dimension will not be compromised. So, ever since Adam and Ḥawwa became common and banished from the set-apart garden, everything on this planet shifted into a state of being common, which isn't necessarily disobedient or unclean, it just isn't set apart. But once you do disobedience and evil, which we've all done, you become unclean. So what I wanted to remind you all of too with this eating and drinking thing up here, the clean and unclean, is it had nothing to do with hygiene, remember? We can't put our Greek mentality, analogical thinking on it and go, oh, that's because pigs are germy. That's not true. Chinese people for thousands of years have been eating seafood and all sorts of things, and they live to over 100, a lot of them. Same in other other nations too. A lot of them eat pork their whole life. They drink, they smoke, they eat pork, they do all sorts of things, Might even take drugs too. They live a long life. It's got nothing to do with hygiene. In fact, the preservatives and sugar content in most foods these days would be more harmful to you probably than eating a pig. But that's not why we don't eat it. It's not for us to decide the why. It's for us to just do it. And if scientists come up with all these solutions and knowledge in this 21st century and go, well, pigs do carry this disease, pigs do carry that disease, lobsters and prawns and seafood do, cleanse the ocean and they are filled with all sorts of toxins. Well, that's great to know. But that's not why we do it. We do it because it's a spiritual issue, actually, being set apart. So, nothing wrong with it. The poor old pig, what did he do wrong? Nothing. But that's not the issue here. He wanted them to be set apart because he is set apart. And the whole idea is it's divine decision. He makes up his mind and separates who he wants to be separated. He separated his nation away from the rest of the world. Why did he choose those people? No idea, nothing special about them. He separated them from the world. He separated the priesthood. Why that tribe? Nothing special about them. He's always separating all the time. Religion tries to unify. Yahusha's separating all the time. I come with a sword. I don't come with peace. I come with a sword. Mother against daughter, father against son, da 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 da. He is separating his bride unto himself, untangling her from the web that she's been living in. So tithing. I'm going to skim through this. We've dealt with all this in Leviticus too. Every year you must set aside 10% of your grain harvest, your wine and olive oil, and the firstborn of every cow, sheep and goat. Take these to the place where Yahuwah chooses to rest his name, and eat them there. This will teach you to always fear and respect Yahuwah in all reverence. Interesting. Is that word reverence? This will teach you to always fear and respect Yahuwah in all reverence. There's a little point I made here. Nothing gets our attention regarding spiritual matters and behaviour more than having to part with or control the insatiable spending of the money in our pocket, does it? How does Yahusha always get our attention? Not always, but the best way to get your attention is to start cutting off the money a bit, isn't it? What's going on? Where's the money? Why, where's the clients? Where's the money? What's going on? What have I done wrong? So while we don't have to tithe and everything, let's look at the context here. So he's talking about tithing. But suppose you can't carry your tithe to the tabernacle. If you live too far away, because we're dealing with when they get into the land, if you live too far away, or if Yahuwah gives you a huge harvest that year, then sell your 10% and take the money to the tabernacle instead. And when you and your family arrives, spend the money on food for a big celebration, a big nosh up. Buy cattle, sheep, goats, beer, wine and spirits, anything your being desires. And if there are any other kinds of food that you want, buy those too. Yeah. And since people of the Levi tribe won't own any land for growing crops, remember to ask them to come and celebrate with you. Every third year, instead of using the 10% of your harvest for a big celebration, bring it into town and put it in a community storehouse. The Levites have no land of their own, so you must give them food from the storehouse. You must also give food to the poor who live in your town, including orphans, widows and foreigners. If they have enough to eat, then Yahuwah your Elohim will be pleased and make you successful in everything you do. So we just talked about tithing, the 10% to the priesthood, to the tabernacle, tithing it to Yahusha really. What is the 21st century context of all this tithing talk? Clearly giving money, possessions or food to an institution or building today is ridiculous, since the divine real estate, housing the portal, where Yahusha rests his name, is now his immersed bride. So the only way to summarise these instructions into a modern behaviour would be to look at the generosity Yahusha requires of us. Today, it's not about giving 10%, that's all tabernacle talk. We don't have a physical tabernacle, or priesthood or anything like that. So the tithing is relevant. What is it to it? But every word of scripture is relevant to us in some way. So how's this going to be relevant to us? Well, I'm saying here that we should look at the generosity Yahusha requires of us. To assist and help another genuine brother and sister, because we're dealing with Yisrael here, so the bride. Not talking about every Tom, Dick and Harry who puts their hand out for money, or any kind of scammer that comes along, or institution, whatever. I'm talking about genuine bride here. To assist and help anyone. To assist and help another genuine brother or sister in need. Orphans and widows, etc. Not necessarily financially, but our willingness to surrender our time and attention. Or maybe even a hot meal to someone who just needs love and understanding. To sacrifice your plans, agendas and self-life for someone else. This behaviour is another part of the transformed living sacrifices, no longer animals and blood, that we are to offer up in our divine temples, bodies to please Yahusha. They had to offer up living sacrifices of goats and lambs and sheep and goats, all that sort of stuff, cows, cattle. So today we are the living dwelling place of his portal, of his ruach, his spirit. So the living sacrifices we offer up are behaviours, and this generosity is part of it. This is part of the living sacrifice we offer up. So there. Release of debts. Every 7 years you must announce, Yahuwah says that loans don't need to be paid back. A release of debts. So if you've loaned money to another Yisraelite, and you can no longer ask for any payment. This requirement applies only to loans you have made to other Yisraelites. It's interesting. Foreigners, the outside nations, will still have to pay back what you have loaned them. They don't want the covenant relationship, so they don't get the benefits or protection of it. If you're part of Israel, every 7 years, you announce that all debts have been, a release of debts. If you're not in Israel, get stuffed. Pay it back. No one poor in Israel. No one in Israel should ever be poor. If they're all doing these instructions and looking out for one another, no one should ever be poor. Yahweh your Elohim is giving you this land, and he has promised to make you very successful if you obey his divine laws and instructions that I'm giving you today. You will lend money to many nations, but you will never have to borrow. You will rule many nations, but they will never rule you. Did that ever really happen? Did a little bit. It built crescendo kind of up to David and Solomon, and then it all just went. They got scattered because of their behavior and their idolatry. And what's happened to the Hebrew people ever since then? We might be one of them. The bloodlines have all been scattered and washed away, scattered into the nations, but those who are standing up saying they're Hebrews, Jews, what's happened to them? Have they been ruled by many nations? Yes. They're still battling to get their land back, they think. They think it's all about land. After Yahweh your Elohim gives land to each of you, there may be poor Israelites in the town where you live. So if there are, don't be mean and selfish with your money. Instead, be kind and lend them what they need. But be careful. Don't say to yourself, soon it will be the 7th year and then I won't be able to get my money back. Scrooge, bloody little dirty little Scrooge. It would be horrible for you to think that way and to be so selfish that you refuse to help the poor. They are your relatives. And if you don't help them, they may ask Yahuwah to decide whether or not you've done wrong. And he may declare you guilty. You should be happy to give another poor Israelite what they need, because then Yahuwah will make you successful in everything you do. So it's not about looking at the money that you're holding in your hand and what to do with it. It's about tapping into Yahusha, his divine provision. And if he says to you to help someone or do this or do that, you don't go, oh, but what about me? Because you already know he looks after you. You're not worried about you. He looks after you. He's asked you to help somebody else. There will always be some Israelites who are poor and needy through various circumstances, and that's why I'm instructing you to be generous with them. That's similar to what Yahusha said to later on to his disciples, isn't it? The poor you will always have among you, but not me. Treatment of slaves. If any of you buy Israelites as slaves, you must set them free after 6 years. And don't just tell them they are free to leave. Give them sheep and goats and a good supply of grain and wine. Generosity. Don't be a tight ass. The more Yahuwah has given you, the more you should give them. I'm instructing you to obey Yahuwah as a reminder that you were slaves in Egypt before he set you free. How did you like it? How did you feel when you were under the thumb? How did you, if you're an employer, how did you like it when you used to be an employee, an apprentice, a worker? How did you like it how did you like the way you were treated? How did you like it out in the world as a slave? Well, how are you going to treat your slaves, your employees, your family even? People you know, people you might have a position or some kind of status amongst. How are you going to treat them, But one of your slaves may say, I love you and your family, and I would be better off staying with you. So please don't make me leave. Take the slave to the door of your house and push a sharp metal rod through one earlobe and into the door. Such love slaves will belong to you for life, whether they are men or women. That was Eliezer, Abraham's servant. He was there for life. And don't ever complain when you have to set a slave free. Don't ever complain when you have to set a slave free. After all, you got 6 good years of service at half the price of hiring someone to do the work. So can you see that Yahusha's instructions for worship, reverence, and service to the earthly tabernacle all related to practical everyday behaviours within Israel? How they treated each other, looked after one another, cared for others, the poor, the widows, the slaves. It wasn't like what we saw when Yahusha walked the earth, when the Pharisees were there and how they behaved in regards to the temple, the tabernacle, temple. It wasn't that. That was all a song and dance, and that's what we see today with all the movements of believers. We see that behaviour. No matter what words or names they call the Creator, that behaviour is still there. In the bride, Yahusha's bride, people who promote Yahusha's bride, you can still see that behaviour, that Pharisee possession, religious authority behaviour, you can see it. But when we see, back when Moses was talking, Yahusha's instructions, the reverence, the worship, the serving Yahusha was all practical, wasn't it? It was all about their practical everyday lives. When you slaughter a sheep, when you bring a bull to the tabernacle, he left nothing up to the imagination. So today, our fear and reverence, praise and worship is not done in a building somewhere between certain hours. It's how we behave all day, every day. How we treat our families, our employees, those we've borrowed from or to. Yahusha is in every finite detail of our day-to-day lives. And if we don't realise this and choose to live by his divine laws, will he ever know us? If we don't realise this and choose to live by his divine laws, will he ever know us? We don't have to find the location for worship. We don't have to do that today. I need an assembly. I need other people. Well, you don't need to. You don't need to. You don't have to find the location for worship because Yahusha already has. It's you. You are the tabernacle. You are the living dwelling. We don't have to find the location for worship because Yahusha already has. We need to obediently follow his divine laws in our behaviour. That is the only true worship in spirit and in truth that he accepts today. We must always keep in mind the context of Deuteronomy, which is that Moses is making his final address to the people of Israel only days before he will die. As he stands before Israel in the mountains of Moab that overlook the Jordan Valley and the long hoped for permanent home of Yahusha's people, if there is one underlying theme that he's attempting to project here, it's probably best summed up by the words of one of Israel's most notable kings, and that's Solomon, son of David. In the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon reaches his conclusion. And this was the wisest man on the earth. Yahusha asked him, "What do you want from me?" He said, "Wisdom. I want to be wise. I want to know you." So this guy, Solomon, reached his conclusion after his explanation on the meaning of life. If you want to know what the meaning of life is, you might as well ask the wisest man on earth, wouldn't you? And he said in Ecclesiastes 12, the whole meaning of life and the end of the matter. That's it. End of discussion. Mic drop. Nothing after this. No, I'm talking. No, this is the point. The whole meaning of life and the end of the matter is this: fear Yahuwah with all reverence and guard his instructions in your heart. For this is man's purpose for being alive on this planet. People out there are going, what's the meaning of life? What does my life mean? Why was I even born? Why do I exist? If you're ever in a position or strike up a friendship with any of these people, one day you might be able to say to them, this is the meaning of life. This is why you were born. This is your purpose for being alive on this planet, to fear Yahuwah. We've got to fear Yahusha with all reverence and guard his instructions in your heart. This is man's purpose for being alive on the planet. Isn't that good to know? Nothing else will satisfy us. Solomon said that. Nothing else is satisfying. There's nothing new under heaven or earth. There's nothing new that's been done that hasn't been done before. You can't come up with anything original. It's always been done. And that was back then. The word used for man, this is man's purpose, mankind's purpose. The word used for man in Hebrew is Adam, and it means man in general. Mankind in general. So in the sense of this verse, it means mankind as a whole. This verse in no way limits its audience to Hebrews only. It doesn't say this is Yahusha's bride's purpose for being alive, does it? It doesn't say this is the Yisrael's. It doesn't say this is the Hebrews' purpose. No, this is mankind's purpose. All of mankind. This verse in no way limits its audience to Hebrews only. It is referring to all mankind. Let us always remember that Yahusha's written instructions are contained in his divine laws, and that he says that the divine laws and instructions have never ceased. And they have never ceased, and they never will until this whole universe ceases to exist. How about that? So the word reverence has come up a fair bit here. Moses is talking about reverence. Solomon's talking about reverence. It's coming up. I'd never used that word much. It sounded too serious. Reverence. What does it mean though? Because it's fairly important. Fear Yahuwah, guard his instructions with all fear and reverence. You know, what does reverence mean? It sounds like a real staunch religious word, doesn't it? You will have reverence. But what does Yahusha feel about it? Because it's in his scriptures. So it's good to dissect these words so we can put them back into our vocabulary in the right way. Like I have with the word law. I'm starting to use that a bit more now because instructions is good. They are personal instructions, but they also laws. We're grafted into the commonwealth, into the reign, the kingdom, the government, constitutional legislation of Yahusha. So let's look at reverence. In Hebrew, 3372, _, to fear, morally to revere, to frighten. Frighten. Are you frightened of Yahusha? Or do you think he's all about love? He is, but are you frightened of him? Are there certain things you won't do in your life because you're too scared to? Or is that not your view on Yahusha? Affright, make afraid. Dread, terrible. Hebrew 334, _, to fear, dreadful, exceedingly fear. Hebrew, to depress, prostrate, especially reflexive in homage to ℧𝕧𝕗. Bow self down, crouch, fall down, flat, humbly beseech, do make obeisance, do reverence, make to stoop, to worship. How many times have you had to bow down, you know, even within yourself? Or maybe you've just got to get down, you know, if you've got a bad back or sore knees or anything like that, it's hard enough getting on the floor to pick up something. How many times, even just in our behaviour, inside ourselves, have you felt his hand on the back of your neck, pushing your head down? You will stop doing that. I hate that behaviour. And you feel it on there, you know. You feel the clamp, the vice on your head, him crushing your head. That's the flogging, rebuking, chastising. No, he's all about love. He doesn't flog me. BS, that's what I say. Hebrews 12, I flog every child that I love, you know. So we all go through this experience so that we have reverence. We have a healthy fear, yeah? Not a fear of his cruelty because he's a harsh taskmaster and cruel. No, but because we don't want the pain when he leaves us, the pain of when he flogs us, the pain of our own consequences. So we fear Yahusha with reverence, you know, obey him. Reverence should be part of our character and set apart behaviour before Yahusha and each other at all times. Reverence should be a part of our character and set apart behaviour. Talked about that up there too, about the clean and unclean animals, didn't it? I want you to be set apart, he says. This has nothing to do with hygiene, it's set apart. I want you to be set apart. And this fear and reverence will set us apart too, because there's no reverence out in the world. They're just a pack of scoffers and, you know, totally disrespectful, depraved. The words that come out of people's mouths is just degrading and cruel. So this reverence should be coming through our behaviours, guys. And in 2 Peter, the day of Yahusha's return will surprise everyone. Coming suddenly like a thief in the night, the skies will disappear with a loud noise and intense heat will melt the whole universe. Then the earth and everything on it will be seen for the wickedness it truly is and destroyed. So since this destruction comes soon, what kind of people do you think you should be? Living in set apartness and reverence, of course. That's what Peter said. Kepha, that's what he said. knowing that all this is going to happen, what kind of people do you think you should be? How do you think you should be behaving? Set apartness and reverence, of course. Peter speaks of scoffers coming in the last days that will mock the second coming. And walking in their own lusts, they'll say, where's the promise of his coming? What's with that? I thought you said your Messiah was coming back soon. Yeah. I thought you said you were the Messiah. Why don't you could save others. Why can't you save yourself? Jump off that bloody cross. Come on, save yourself. Mockers, it's the same spirit, it's Satan. Where's the promise of his coming? What's with that? I thought you said your Messiah was coming back soon. Yet all of our fathers have gone, the tides and seasons have carried on just as they always have from the very beginning, and nothing ever changes. That's what they all say. Oh, another doomsday person, another person standing on the corner, the end of the world, the end of the world. How many cults have prophesied the end of the world? That's why we don't prophesy it. But we know that it's coming. Verse 7 says, but they, this is the scoffers, they conveniently forget that this present dimension, the whole universe, is being sustained merely as fuel for the fire. Fuel for the final fire. A day of judgment and horrific destruction of wicked mankind. They think because nothing's changing and the world's going on, that the prophecy, that the truth of what Yahusha said in his word is not true. But what does this say? This present dimension, everything you see with your ears and see with your ears and hear with your eyes, everything you see with your ears and hear, everything is being sustained merely as fuel for the final fire. A day of judgment and horrific destruction of wicked mankind. There are many wicked men and women on earth right now that are being kept for the day of fire. Today, many believers have behaviour mixed with worldliness and truth. 1 foot in Yahusha and 1 foot in the world. And this is unacceptable. This is unacceptable. We all must be set apart, walking on Yahusha's instructions, not walking on the lusts of lawlessness. The whole scripture is instruction for our behaviour. And we have to strive and make a greater effort not to fall asleep by the seduction of lawlessness. Now we have the knowledge and power of divine law. We can overcome all temptation in reverence and fear with set apart behaviour. Remember, this world is going to be totally destroyed. There will be nothing left. And in 1 Thessalonians, Paul says, guys, this is another reference to the end of the world, when Yahusha comes back, the great and awesome day of Yahusha. Guys, surely I don't need to talk to you about the times and seasons of Yahusha's return, do I? He's coming suddenly, like a thief comes in the night. You can't mark it on your calendar, okay? He's not making an appointment with you. Everyone will be walking around thinking they're all safe and secure, seeking peace in their complacency. Then suddenly everything will fall apart and destruction comes on them like labour pains to a pregnant woman. And they shall not escape. You shall not escape. Donald Trump is globally announcing this morning peace is coming to Israel and the Arab nations, mainly for the purpose of employment and open trade, to bring prosperity to these nations and America. Donald Trump is being recommended for the Nobel Peace Prize for such an achievement. But what does Scripture say about this announcement? We all have our plans, but should we take note of just how close this situation is to scriptural prophecy? Do you think we are sufficiently prepared? Do you think we're sufficiently prepared? What if it came back tomorrow, next week, next month? Could be this lot of trumpets. Trumpets is coming up in a month or so. What if it was this year? Are you sufficiently prepared? Have you put off all the worldly behaviours that Yahusha hates? Because he can't be married to a whore, and anybody that's got any of that whorish behaviour in them can't be unequally yoked. Everyone who does not have set apart behaviour and reverence will be destroyed. That's a whammy, isn't it? That was the article that was on Facebook, and it blew my brain out. Look at it. This is really serious, guys. I know people my age, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, we don't want to be serious. We're sick of the older folks telling us we have to take this seriously and be this and be that, and we just want to stuff around and I don't know, but where did it get us? Where did it get us? Yahusha is very serious. Yes, he's got a sense of humour, his love and joy and peace and everything. Wonderful, intoxicating feeling when you're in his presence, but we have to overcome. It's a serious thing within you. You don't go around being serious and you got to be serious. No, inside you. This is what you live for. This is the most serious thing in your life, within yourself, in your inner thought life, your inner behaviour, which is your worship. So let's kick this point home now. Again, this is not about making religious rules and regulations regarding external habits and lifestyles with the bride. Tattoos, piercings, haircuts, clothes, drinking, smoking, etc., and judging each other. You're not taking this seriously enough. You're not set apart enough. You know, I mean, obviously as we mature, we can see other believers who aren't as mature as us. Not for us to judge though. You can just see what you see out of your eyes. You don't need to have a judgment about it. This is a personal relationship. This is not about making religious rules and regulations that everybody has to adhere to, judging each other accordingly. No, this is a personal journey we must all take with Yahusha, who is living and working in his bride and is bringing forth the set-apart behaviour of reverence that he requires within each of us. He is pushing us, he is training us, he is leading you on your training path. I can't have someone else's relationship, they can't have mine, you can't have mine, I can't have yours. It's a personal training plan. There are divine moral laws laid out in the scriptures, black and white, right and wrong, good and evil. But then there are hundreds of tiny decisions we must make every day and all the thoughts that go along with them. Decisions that are not necessarily discussed in scripture. What to wear, what colour to wear, what to eat for lunch, which street to turn down today, what to watch on TV. Decisions that are neither right nor wrong no matter what we choose. So there's moral laws, and there's always hundreds of decisions we have to make every day that are neither right nor wrong, just personal preference. However, Yahusha has given us free will and the ability to make choices in our lives. However, knowing how much he loves us and seeks to be so intimately close with us in every one of these even tiny decisions, do you think he wants to reign in all these experiences, words and thoughts being made within his divine set-apart real estate, where he has chosen to rest the power of his name? You are the divine set-apart real estate where he has chosen to rest the power of his name. And he has. You've been immersed in the name of Yahusha. His name is written on your forehead. His name rests on your forehead. And likewise, we rest on the Shabbat. You are now divine real estate being trained to be consummated with him. He has a down payment of his Ruach within you. This is the only place on earth within your heart and my heart, if you've been immersed in Yahusha, where the set-apart portal, interdimensional portal, sits. That's what's happening, guys. So all these external things, what colour you wear, whether you've got a beard, whether long hair, short hair, tattoos, earrings, who cares if you got this on your heart? Because he'll soon tell you, I don't think you should dress like that anymore. You know, it's not about clothes, unless you're dressing like a complete whore. You know, like it's not about fashion. It's about behaviour, training your behaviour. Go and get yours. You can't help anybody else unless you've got something to offer. And you've got nothing to offer unless you've spent time in the Word and trained your body, your thinking, your mind in the disciplines of divine law. So go get yours, guys. Go on. Go get it. Love yous.